Let me tell you something about Kim Do-hyun. He is 6 feet 2 inches of cold, controlled, insufferable alpha. The kind of man who walks into a room and makes the temperature drop 3 degrees just from the weight of his presence. He has never once smiled at me in the 14 months I have worked at CO and Han Consulting. He has never said good morning. He has never acknowledged that I, Park Seo-nil, exist as anything other than a function. A junior analyst who submits reports on time and makes the best coffee on the 23rd floor and occasionally earns a single nod of approval that I am embarrassed to admit I go home and think about. So when I say that I woke up in his penthouse, in his bed, wrapped in sheets that smelled devastatingly like him, cedar and dark amber and something warm underneath that made my omega instincts do things I refuse to describe in polite company, you have to understand the full catastrophic weight of that sentence. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started with the tea. The company's year-end party was held on the top floor of the CO and Han building, which had been transformed for the evening into something that looked like a fever dream. Fairy lights strung from the ceiling, catering tables groaning under the weight of food nobody was actually eating, and approximately 200 people in expensive clothes pretending to enjoy themselves while networking aggressively. I had not wanted to come. I am, by nature, a person who prefers small spaces and quiet evenings and the particular comfort of my own apartment, where nobody expects anything from me and I can exist in peace. But attendance had been strongly implied by my department head, and so I had put on my good white dress shirt, done something intentional with my hair, and shown up with the quiet determination of a man walking into mild battle. The first hour was fine. I spoke to my colleague Rina, who was 3 glasses of champagne deep and increasingly philosophical. I ate several things off a passing tray. I smiled at people whose names I half remembered and nodded at conversations I was only partially following. Then I found the tea station. It was tucked into a corner near the window, away from the louder crowd. A beautiful spread of loose-leaf teas in glass jars, a proper electric kettle, ceramic cups arranged neatly on a tray. I could have wept with relief. I made myself a cup of something that smelled faintly floral and sweet, found a quiet spot near the window overlooking the city, and breathed for the first time all evening. The city at night from 23 floors up is a particular kind of beautiful, all scattered light and dark water and the sense that the world is both enormous and manageable from the right distance. I stood there and drank my tea and let myself just exist for a moment, which I should have known was too good to last. That's not the regular tea. The voice came from directly behind me, low, measured, and devastatingly familiar. I turned. Kim Do-hyun stood 2 feet away, still in his suit jacket unlike most of the men who had loosened their ties an hour ago, holding a glass of something amber and looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not the usual cool assessment. Something else. Something almost like concern, which sat strangely on features usually arranged into careful neutrality. I'm sorry. I managed. He nodded toward my cup. The tea on the left side of the tray. The floral one. A pause, almost imperceptible. It has omega relaxant in it. It's meant for the designated quiet room, not general serving. Someone must have mixed up the placement. I looked down at my cup. I looked back up at him. Omega relaxant, I repeated. It's mild, he said, and something in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. But combined with your natural scent chemistry, if you're not on suppressants. I ran out on Tuesday, I said, mostly to myself, in the tone of a man watching a distant disaster approach in slow motion. Kim Do-hyun closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, his expression had shifted into something I had never seen directed at me before, focused and careful, and underneath it something that made the back of my neck feel warm in a way that had nothing to do with the tea. How much did you drink? He asked. Almost all of it, I admitted. He looked at my nearly empty cup. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, in a way he had carefully avoided doing for 14 months, in a way that made me suddenly aware of every inch of space between us. You need to sit down, he said. Somewhere quiet. Away from this many alphas. I'm fine, I said automatically, which was when the room tilted very slightly to the left and I reached out instinctively for something to hold on to. His hand caught my elbow before I found the windowsill. His grip was careful in the way of someone who was being deliberate about it, who was choosing, consciously, exactly how much pressure to use. You're not fine, he said quietly. Come with me. And here is the thing I will never fully explain. The thing that made no logical sense given 14 months of professional indifference. I went. Not because the tea was making my thoughts soft and warm, though it was. Not because his hand on my elbow felt like the most natural thing in the world, though it did. But because Kim Do-hyun, who had never once looked at me like I was anything other than a well-functioning employee, was looking at me now like I was something he needed to keep safe. And my foolish, completely unguarded heart believed him. I don't remember the elevator clearly. I remember the warmth of it. I remember his hand moving from my elbow to the small of my back as I swayed slightly. A steadying gesture, efficient and careful, and yet the heat of his palm through the thin fabric of my shirt was something I felt in my spine. I remember looking up at his profile in the elevator's reflected light, the clean line of his jaw, the slight tension in his expression, the way his eyes stayed fixed forward with the determination of a man exercising enormous self-control. I remember thinking, with the soft clarity of a mind gently loosened by floral tea and the proximity of a devastating alpha, that Kim Do-hyun was extraordinarily beautiful when he wasn't actively ignoring me. "Stop looking at me like that," he said, without turning his head. "Like what?" I asked. The pause. The elevator doors opened. "Like that," he said again, and walked me out, his hands still warm at my back, and said nothing else. His apartment occupied the entire top floor. I absorbed this information with the particular detachment of someone whose brain was operating at approximately 60% capacity, which is to say, I noticed it the way you notice something impressive through glass. Distantly. With appreciation I couldn't quite fully access. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sprawling endlessly below. Furniture in dark wood and deep charcoal that managed to feel warm rather than cold. Books on every surface, a grand piano in the corner that I absolutely did not expect, low lighting that turned everything amber and close. It smelled like him. Of course it smelled like him. It was his home. But the full weight of his scent, cedar and dark amber and that warm underneath note that I had only ever caught faint traces of in passing, hit me in the doorway like a physical thing, and my omega instincts, already loosened by the tea, responded in a way that made me grateful he was several steps ahead and not looking at me. "Sit," he said, nodding toward the couch. I sat. He disappeared into what I assumed was a kitchen, and I took the opportunity to press my palms flat against my thighs and have a very brief internal conversation with myself about composure. About professionalism. About the fact that I was Park Seo-nil, junior analyst, a person of dignity and self-possession, and the tea would wear off and everything would be fine. Then he came back with a glass of cold water and a small plate of plain crackers, the kind of thing you give someone whose system needs grounding, and sat down on the low table directly in front of me, close enough that our knees almost touched, and I forgot everything I had just told myself. "Drink," he said, handing me the water. I drank. He watched me do it with an expression I was becoming increasingly unable to decode, careful and controlled on the surface, and underneath something that pulled at the air between us like a current. "Better?" he asked when I'd finished half the glass. "Getting there," I said honestly. "Thank you. I'm sorry about this. You didn't mix up the tray placement." "No, but I drank the whole cup without asking what it was, so." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. A ghost of warmth that appeared and disappeared so quickly I would have doubted it if I hadn't been watching his face with the close, unguarded attention of someone whose usual filters were currently offline. "You always do that," he said. I blinked. "Do what?" "Apologize for things that aren't your fault." I stared at him. 14 months of careful professional distance, of precise nods and quarterly report feedback delivered in clipped, efficient sentences. And now he was sitting close enough that I could see the faint shadow of tiredness under his eyes, and telling me he had noticed something about me. "You've been paying attention," I said before I could stop myself. The not quite smile again, and this time it stayed a half-second longer. "You're not easy to ignore," he said quietly. "I've tried." The city glittered below us. The room hummed with a silence that felt full rather than empty, charged with something neither of us had named yet, something that had apparently been building for 14 months in the space between quarterly reports and morning coffee and professional nods that I had gone home and thought about. "Why did you try?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. His eyes in this light were darker than usual, deep and steady, and something in them that made my breath come a little shorter. Because you're my employee, he said. And because the first time I smelled your scent in the elevator, I stood there for 10 seconds after the doors opened and couldn't remember what floor I needed. The cracker I was holding crumbled slightly in my fingers. Oh, I said. Yes, he said. Oh. He made me stay. Not forcefully, he was excruciatingly careful about that, about making sure every step was something I was choosing. But he was also practical about it in the way that alpha instinct sometimes expressed itself as logistics rather than emotion. It was late, my system was still processing the relaxant. The idea of me navigating the city alone in this state was something he clearly found unacceptable in a way he expressed through a slight tension in his jaw rather than words. He gave me a guest room. Fresh shirt, folded on the bed. Water on the nightstand. The door left meaningfully, deliberately open, not closed, not locked, just open, as if to say this is not a trap, you can leave whenever you choose. I lay in his guest bed in his oversized shirt that smelled faintly of cedar and listened to the quiet sounds of his apartment and thought about 10 seconds in an elevator. 10 seconds. Kim Do-hyun, who ran board meetings with the precision of a Swiss watch and had never once given me any indication that I existed beyond my quarterly output, had stood in an elevator for 10 seconds because of my scent. I pressed my face into the pillow. It smelled like him too. I was in so much trouble. I woke up to sunlight and the smell of coffee. Real coffee, not the office machine kind, not the convenience store kind, but the slow, deliberate kind that meant someone had ground beans and used proper equipment and cared about the process. It drifted under the guest room door like a gentle summons, and I lay there for approximately 30 seconds being confused before the previous evening assembled itself in my memory in vivid, slightly mortifying detail. The elevator. The penthouse. You're not easy to ignore. I've tried. I sat up. I was still in his shirt. My own clothes were folded neatly on the chair in the corner. At some point someone, presumably him, had retrieved them from wherever I'd left them and done that. Which meant he had been in this room while I slept, moving quietly, and the thought of that did something to my chest that I was not prepared to examine before coffee. I found him in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with his back to me, still in last night's dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he was making eggs with the same focused precision he brought to everything, methodical, unhurried, like a man who did not do anything carelessly. He heard me in the doorway and didn't turn around immediately, which somehow felt more intimate than if he had, like he was giving me a moment to collect myself, to arrive at my own pace. How do you take your eggs? He asked. However they come, I said, and my voice was still morning soft in a way I couldn't help. He glanced over his shoulder then. Just briefly. And something in his expression, the way it shifted when he saw me standing in his kitchen doorway in his shirt, hair unmanaged, face unguarded, made me want to step backward and forward simultaneously. Sit down, he said and turned back to the eggs. I sat at his kitchen island and watched him cook and tried to remember the last time someone had made me breakfast. The answer was my mother, 3 years ago, when I had visited home for Chuseok, and the comparison between that and this was doing strange things to my composure. He set a plate in front of me. Eggs, toast, sliced fruit arranged with the same precision as everything else he did. Then a cup of coffee, exactly the way I took it, which meant he knew how I took it, which meant he had been paying attention to that too. I looked at the coffee. I looked at him. You know how I take my coffee, I said. He sat down across from me with his own cup. You make it the same way every morning on the 23rd floor. It's not surveillance. It's proximity. It's paying attention. Yes, he said simply. It is. We ate in a silence that should have been awkward and somehow wasn't, the comfortable kind, the kind that didn't need to be filled, the kind I had only ever experienced with people I had known for years. Outside his windows the city was fully awake, bright and sharp in morning light, and in here it was warm and quiet and smelled like coffee and cedar. Last night, I started. Last night I made sure you were safe, he said. That's all that happened. I know. I turned my coffee cup in my hands. I didn't think anything else happened. I just meant, I stopped. Started again. You said something. In the living room. He was quiet. 10 seconds, I said. In the elevator. He set his cup down with the careful precision of a man buying himself a moment. I shouldn't have said that, he said. Why? Because you work for me. I know. Because it puts you in an unfair position. Do-hyun. His name in my mouth, his given name, not the title, not the formal address, made him go still in a way that was deeply satisfying and terrifying in equal measure. I've been making your coffee the same way for 14 months, hoping you'd notice. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. He looked at me across his kitchen island in the morning light, and whatever careful control he had been maintaining since last night shifted, not breaking, but bending, in the way of something that had been held taut for a very long time. "Seonil," he said. My name in his voice was a different thing entirely than I had expected, low and careful, and something underneath that made my omega instincts go very, very quiet in the specific way that meant pay attention. "Yes," I said. He stood up, carried his plate to the sink, and stood there for a moment with his back to me, and I watched the line of his shoulders and waited. Then he turned around. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Not here. Somewhere that isn't my apartment, somewhere that gives you every option to change your mind. A proper dinner. As a proper question." His jaw was set in the way I recognized from board meetings, decided, but with effort. "If you want to." I looked at him across his kitchen. Kim Do-hyun, who had stood in an elevator for 10 seconds, who knew how I took my coffee, who had put a glass of water on my nightstand and left the door open and made me eggs in the morning, was asking me to dinner with the expression of a man who was not at all certain of the answer. I picked up my coffee cup. "What time?" I said. And Kim Do-hyun smiled. A real one. The first one I had ever seen, slow and warm and devastating, and I understood immediately that I had been completely unprepared for it. 14 months of trying to ignore each other, and it turned out all it took was the wrong cup of tea. He chose a restaurant that was small and warm and tucked between two larger buildings like a secret. Not the kind of place I expected from Kim Do-hyun. I had imagined somewhere intimidating and architecturally significant, somewhere that required a reservation 3 months in advance. Instead it was intimate, candlelit, with a menu handwritten on a chalkboard and a host who greeted him by name with the ease of long familiarity. He had been here before. He liked it enough to come back. He had chosen it, specifically, for tonight. I filed all of this away with the careful attention of someone who had spent 14 months learning to read a man from a distance and was now, terrifyingly, up close. "You look nervous," he said when we were seated. "You look calm," I said. "It's unsettling." "I'm not calm," he said, with the simple directness that I was learning was just how he communicated when he wasn't performing professionalism. "I've changed my shirt 3 times. I stared at him. "You changed your shirt 3 times, I repeated. "The first one had a loose button. The second one was wrong." The pause. "The third one was also almost wrong." "Kim Do-hyun," I said, slowly. "Yes. Are you nervous because of me?" He looked at me across the candlelight with those dark, steady eyes. "I have been nervous because of you," he said, "for 14 months. The candle between us flickered. Somewhere in the restaurant, soft music played. I thought about 14 months of quarterly reports and morning coffee and professional nods, and underneath all of it, apparently, this 2 people being carefully, deliberately nervous about each other in the space between what was allowed and what was true. "You hit it very well," I said. "I'm good at control," he said. "Until apparently I'm not." His eyes dropped briefly to my hands on the table, then back up. "You're not wearing your suppressant patch." "I ran out Tuesday," I said. "I told you." "I know." He said it quietly. "I can smell you properly." "I've been," he stopped. Considered. "It's been a focused evening." The way he said it, controlled and honest simultaneously, like a confession delivered in a business meeting, made warmth spread up the back of my neck. "Focused," I repeated. "You smell like plum blossom and warm sugar," he said, with the tone of a man reciting facts. "It's extremely distracting. I thought you should know." "I thought you were good at control," I said. "I said until apparently I'm not." The ghost of a smile. "You are my apparently." Dinner was easy in the way I hadn't expected. Not the careful, navigated ease of 2 people performing comfort, but real ease, the kind that comes from 2 people who have been paying close attention to each other for a long time and are finally allowed to use what they know. He knew I didn't eat red meat. I knew he took his coffee black. He laughed at 3 things I said, genuinely, and each time it rearranged something in my chest. We talked about everything and nothing. His piano, which he played badly and loved anyway. My grandmother's recipe for honey rice cake, which I had been trying to recreate for 2 years. The book on his coffee table I'd noticed that morning, which turned out to be one of my favorites, which he had apparently picked up in an airport 3 years ago and read 4 times. 4 times, I said. It's a good book, he said. It's my favorite book. He looked at me. I know. Rena mentioned it once. I was paying attention. I set my dessert spoon down very carefully. How long, I said, have you been paying attention? He considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. Since the 2nd week, he said finally. You stayed late to fix an error in someone else's report. You didn't tell anyone you'd done it. I noticed. The 2nd week. 14 months ago. He had been paying attention since the 2nd week. Do-hyun, I said softly. Yes. Take me home. The words landed between us with quiet weight. He went very still, reading them, reading me, making sure he understood what I meant and what I was choosing. Your home or mine? He asked carefully. I held his gaze across the candlelight. Yours still smells like cedar, I said. And you left the door open last night. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and his hand covered mine, warm and certain and deliberate. And the touch was simple and unhurried and more intimate than anything I had ever experienced in a restaurant. I'll always leave the door open, he said. That's not something you have to wonder about. We walked back through streets that smelled like night air and street food and the particular autumn cold that makes everything feel cinematic. He walked close enough that our shoulders touched, and he didn't move away, and neither did I. In the elevator of his building, a different elevator, his private one, which required a key card, I turned to look at him and found him already looking at me, and the 10 seconds he had described from months ago made sudden complete sense. This elevator, this proximity, this scent, cedar and dark amber and warm underneath, and his eyes in this light doing the thing they had been carefully not doing for 14 months. You've been very patient, I said. You were worth being patient for, he said simply. The elevator opened. His apartment was warm and low-lit. He had left a lamp on, which meant he had hoped I would come back, which meant something I felt in my whole chest. I stepped inside. He followed. And somewhere between the elevator and the living room, between the city lights spread below us like scattered stars and the warmth of a space that was beginning to feel like mine too, he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear with a touch so gentle it made my throat tighten, and I turned my face up toward him, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who had spent 14 months being careful and had finally, beautifully, decided he was done. Seonil, he said softly. I know, I said. I know. And when he kissed me it was unhurried and warm and tasted faintly of the dessert wine from dinner, and his hands were careful in the way of someone who was being deliberate about how precious they were being, and the city glittered below us, and neither of us was nervous anymore. Outside, Seoul hummed on into the night. Inside, we were finally, completely, exactly where we were supposed to be.